There are thoughts that drift through the mind like a passing breeze, only to return again and again, persistent, refusing to let go. One of those is a strange hypothesis. What if Earth is not simply a fortunate planet adrift in the cosmos, but a test deliberately arranged? A proving ground where every choice, every hardship, and even the smallest joy is marked like ink on the pages of an unseen record. The observer could be an intelligence far beyond us, an ancient power once called a god, or perhaps even our own distant descendants watching their ancestors stumble and rise again. This idea doesn't ask for rigid explanations or cold laws of physics. It quietly places a question in your thoughts. How would your view of the world change if every detail around you, from an unexpected rain shower to the sudden appearance of a stranger, was part of a vast experiment? As we sit together in this same moment, in different corners of the planet, we begin that journey of reflection, of welcome to Arcane Skies. If this path of wonder feels like the kind of exploration you'd like to share, leave a like, subscribe if you wish to travel further with us, and drop a comment telling us where in the world and at what time you're listening. From the moment you let the thoughts settle that Earth might be a test, something subtle begins to shift in the way the world feels. The familiar details around you, the hum of your own breathing, the texture of the chair beneath you, the murmur of the outside world, all acquire a faint strangeness, as though they were carefully chosen props on a stage. It's not about paranoia, not about hidden cameras or scripts written by invisible hands, but about leaning into a perspective that refuses to take existence as coincidence. Imagine just for a moment that this environment, with its precarious balance of sunlight and darkness, abundance and scarcity, ease and struggle, has been tuned like an instrument, not for perfection but for revelation. When you hold that possibility close, the question that follows is simple. What is this test meant to measure? Perhaps survival, the most immediate and unrelenting challenge. From the first sparks of human life, survival was never guaranteed. Fire had to be discovered, food had to be hunted or grown, shelter had to be built against storms and predators. If life on Earth were designed as a proving ground, then survival would be the opening question. Can you endure long enough to learn? But survival alone has never been the whole story. There's also morality, a word that has haunted humanity for as long as we've had language. Even before law codes were carved into stone, there were whispered expectations, unspoken lines not to be crossed. Morality, in this frame, is not just about being good or bad, but about what choices you make when resources are scarce, when the easy path requires stepping over someone else. If Earth is a test, then morality is not an essay question with a clear rubric. It's more like an ongoing scenario, a puzzle that adapts with each decision you make. And then comes cooperation. Picture a small group of hunter-gatherers scattered across the plains thousands of years ago. Alone, each one could only gather so much, defend themselves so far, endure so long. Together, they could hunt larger animals, share food, guard each other during the night. Cooperation is one of those invisible threads without which civilizations could never have formed. In a test environment, it might be one of the central variables. Can beings with limited lifespans and boundless differences find a way to work together? The idea may feel abstract, but every time humanity has reached a turning point, cooperation has either carried us forward or left us fractured. From building the first irrigation systems to constructing global communication networks, the test of cooperation has never ended. And yet, behind these familiar categories, survival, morality, cooperation, there might be other hidden questions. A true test rarely tells you what it's really measuring. Sometimes the stated challenge is only a cover, and the real data lies in the unexpected. Imagine a class exercise where the teacher asks students to complete a task, but in truth they're studying how the students react under time pressure, or whether they share with each other, or how they handle failure. If Earth is a test, then perhaps what we think of as success, wealth, power, comfort, might not matter at all. Perhaps the real questions are hidden in the way we respond when comfort is stripped away. That possibility changes the way we see ordinary life. A sudden rainstorm that ruins your plans may not just be bad luck. It could be a nudge to reveal whether you adapt with patience or curse the sky. A stranger's arrival in your path might not be coincidence, but an opening to see if you will treat them with kindness or suspicion. Even the long commutes you've always despised could be seen differently, as a quiet, persistent trial of patience, shaping who you are when time is not yours to control. Ancient cultures often hinted at this perspective, long before the modern world put it into words. The Egyptians spoke of the weighing of the heart, where truth and justice determined the soul's destiny. The Greeks imagined virtue as something sharpened through effort, courage tested in battle, wisdom in dialogue, temperance in restraint. In China, Confucian teaching cast everyday duties as the real measure of character, not lofty declarations, but how one treated family, community, and order. Even indigenous traditions across continents understood life as a path lined with obstacles, each one meant to teach endurance, respect, or humility. From every corner of history, humanity has looked at life and thought, this feels like a trial. Whether or not it was designed, people sensed that their actions mattered beyond the moment. And if you sit with that thought long enough, it begins to seep into the edges of your own story. How many of your choices, small as they seem, would take on new weight if they were part of something larger? The coin you drop into a stranger's hand, the silence you keep when words could wound, the persistence you show when giving up would be easier. All of these become data points, parts of an unfolding evaluation. Yet the unsettling thing is that the test, if it exists, may not be about individuals alone. It could be collective. Imagine an observer not watching you in particular, but humanity as a whole. What would they be looking for? Perhaps whether our species can build sustainable ways to live without consuming ourselves. Whether we can resist the temptation of weapons powerful enough to wipe us out. Whether we can communicate without turning every disagreement into war. The rise and fall of empires, the breakthroughs of science, the failures of diplomacy, all of these might be the long-term record, the planetary exam sheet written across centuries. Look back on history through that lens and the patterns stand out. Civilizations grow, flourish, collapse, and new ones rise, sometimes repeating the same mistakes, sometimes inching forward. Each generation could be another round of data collection, another group of participants in a test that never ends. That view can be comforting. Your struggles are not meaningless. Your setbacks are part of a pattern larger than yourself. But it can also be unsettling, because it means nothing is accidental, and the very hardships you long to escape might be the ones that matter most. If Earth is a test, then the outcome is not fixed. What counts may not be what we achieve, but how we handle the process, whether we panic or persist, whether we cheat or create, whether we give up or keep walking forward despite the unknown. Which raises a strange possibility, perhaps even considering the question is itself part of the test. Perhaps the moment you tilt your head and wonder if it's all arranged, you've already stepped into another layer of it, one where the next measure is what you do with that thought. Do you shrug and return to the routine? Do you chase the mystery and let it reshape the way you live? The test, if it exists, may not be waiting in the distance. It may already be here, woven into each ordinary moment. Once the idea takes root that Earth itself might be arranged like a proving ground, the natural step is to look at the environment around us, not as an accident of physics, but as a carefully prepared stage. From the tilt of the planet's axis to the invisible magnetic field, from the rhythm of the tides to the thin veil of atmosphere, it begins to look less like chance and more like calibration. Take the distance from the sun, for instance. A little closer, and oceans would boil, air would thin, and life as we know it could never take hold. A little farther, and Earth would be an ice-locked desert. Instead, we circle in what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, the rare middle ground where water can flow and breathe life into every corner. When you let yourself imagine this not as coincidence, but as choice, it feels almost as though someone ticked a box on a cosmic checklist. Temperature, stable, orbit, balanced. Even the tilt of our axis at just over 23 degrees seems strangely intentional, granting us seasons that are harsh enough to force adaptation, but not so extreme as to crush possibility. Without them, agriculture might never have flourished, and cultures might never have learned to plan for the future. In a testing framework, seasons act like recurring questions on an exam, repeated in new forms each year, asking life to prove it can adjust again and again. Then there is the moon, our silent partner. It is unusually large compared to its host planet, hovering at just the right distance to stir the seas without drowning the land. Those tides may have been the cradle of early life, mixing nutrients in ways that encouraged evolution to leap forward. At the same time, the moon steadies Earth's rotation, keeping the climate from wobbling into chaos. If you were setting up a long-term trial, what better companion than a satellite that ensures both stability and subtle challenge? Add to this the thin blue skin of atmosphere clinging around our world. It holds the right ratio of nitrogen, oxygen, and trace gases, a delicate balance that allows lungs to fill, fires to burn, and ecosystems to thrive. Too much oxygen and the planet would be a tinderbox. Too little and complex organisms could not survive. It shields us from meteors and radiation, yet lets sunlight through in just the right measure. Think of it less as a random blanket and more as the glass walls of a greenhouse, adjusted for precisely the kind of growth we see. Beneath our feet, the ground itself refuses to stay still. Plate tectonics grind continents against each other, lift mountains skyward, and crack open volcanoes that pour out fertile soils. On the surface, this is destruction, but in a longer view, it is renewal. Carbon cycles through rock and air, temperature regulates itself over millennia, and life finds fresh landscapes to inhabit. A test that ran on a static stage would be too easy to game. Tectonics ensure the questions never stop changing. Even the disasters that terrify us, earthquakes, hurricanes, droughts, can be read differently here. They force preparation, demand cooperation, spark invention. They weed out complacency and remind us that survival is never guaranteed. In an exam, not every question is meant to be comfortable. Some are meant to see how you act when pushed beyond the boundaries of ease. Look up and you see more signs. The sun itself is unusually stable for a star of its kind, burning with remarkable consistency over billions of years. Jupiter, far out in its orbit, acts as a shield, pulling in comets and asteroids that might otherwise smash our planet clean of life. again and again. The balance is delicate. Our magnetic field, generated by a molten core, deflects solar winds that would strip away air and water, as happened to Mars. Without it, Earth would be a barren rock, scoured by cosmic storms. From this angle, each of these features begins to look like a parameter set in place, neither too safe nor too hostile, but tuned to walk a razor's edge between stability and challenge. The water cycle adds another layer, transforming seamlessly from vapor to liquid to ice, coursing through rivers, falling as rain, rising again as mist. That cycle maintains climate, drives ecosystems, and nourishes a range of environments wide enough to produce deserts, jungles, tundras, and oceans. A test without variety would only reveal narrow results, but a stage with this much diversity creates endless possibilities for adaptation. Every species, from the simplest microbe to the most complex mammal, must respond differently, generating data points as if each adaptation were an answer recorded in a ledger. And when catastrophe does strike, life returns. At least 5 times in Earth's history, extinction has reset the clock, erasing most forms of life in blinding sweeps of fire or ice. Yet each time, survivors have clawed their way back, often stranger, more intricate, more resilient than before. If someone were observing, those cycles would be the most telling of all, not perfection without struggle, but persistence after devastation. Think about that for a moment. If you were designing an experiment to see what intelligence could emerge, would you build a paradise? Probably not. Paradise requires no effort, no invention, no empathy born of hardship. Would you build a wasteland? No, nothing could grow there. Instead, you would craft something in between, a place stable enough for complexity to arise, but unstable enough to constantly pressure it, prod it, force it to prove itself. That in-between state is exactly where Earth lives. Not too easy, not too impossible, but precariously balanced on the edge of order and chaos. It is in that tension that life becomes inventive, determined, and astonishingly creative. What makes this line of thought difficult is how fragile the balances really are. A slight shift in tilt, a minor wobble in orbit, a change in solar output, and the test could collapse. And yet, here we are, the latest witnesses to a continuity stretching back billions of years. From this perspective, even the smallest detail feels like part of the design. The way trees breathe out oxygen while we breathe it in. The way bees pollinate flowers that feed entire ecosystems. The way weather patterns oscillate, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, always shaping behaviour. Once you let yourself think of these as deliberate, the world becomes less a backdrop and more a labyrinth, a carefully arranged environment with hidden corridors and subtle instructions. And if the stage itself looks prepared, what about the script? If conditions are tuned so precisely, could the events of history also be more than random? Perhaps every upheaval, every invention, every moment of discovery or collapse is another variation of the test unfolding in real time. When viewed from above, the entire arc of existence starts to resemble not chaos, but an experiment designed to reveal something essential. The unsettling part is that we do not know what that something is. Perhaps it is cooperation. Perhaps it is creativity. Perhaps it is a quality we cannot even name. All we know is that we keep playing our roles, generation after generation, as though the curtain has already been drawn, and the watchers, whoever they are waiting to see how the scene unfolds. If the Earth itself feels like a stage, then the rules we live under might be the fine print of the exam, conditions we never agreed to but cannot escape. Some of these are written into the fabric of nature, undeniable and universal. Time, for example, moves only in one direction. No matter what you do, you cannot rewind a moment already lived, nor leap forward to see an outcome before it arrives. Every choice becomes permanent the moment it is made. In a test, this single constraint would be one of the most effective tools of all. Without the ability to edit or preview, you're forced to act in uncertainty, to live with consequences, and to reveal, through those choices, what kind of person you are. Then there is the frailty of the body. Each of us arrives here in a vessel of flesh and bone that demands food, water, rest, and protection. No amount of ambition or desire can erase the basic needs. A body can be injured, can fall ill, can grow weak with age. None of us get to opt out. In testing terms, it's a levelling mechanism, a reminder that survival is never automatic. You must earn it day after day, despite whatever else you hope to achieve. Pain, too, sits at the centre of the rulebook. Physical pain warns when something is broken or dangerous, but it is more than a signal. It is a teacher. Emotional pain, quieter but often deeper, shows you the weight of regret, the sting of loss, the ache of loneliness. In a designed environment, pain would be indispensable. Without it, there is no reason to change course, no motivation to adapt, no empathy when you see another suffer. With it, every action has weight, and every moment of kindness has context. You recognize compassion precisely because you understand suffering. Loss is another unspoken condition, one that threads itself through every human story. Nothing lasts. People vanish, possessions disappear, opportunities slip away. Sometimes the departures are gradual, sometimes they happen in an instant. If this were a test, loss would be one of its sharpest tools, not as punishment, but as revelation. What do you do when something you love is taken from you? Do you collapse? Do you cling to what remains? Do you create anew? Each response is a mark on the unseen score sheet. Beyond nature's rules are the ones we invent for ourselves. Laws, customs, unwritten expectations, they differ from place to place, yet shape our lives as if they were extensions of the environment. In one culture, generosity is honoured. In another, it may be seen as weakness. In one society, obedience is prized. In another, independence is celebrated. To an observer, these shifting codes might be part of the design, a way to watch how humans navigate conflicting rules, how they reconcile contradictions, how they choose when the instructions don't align. Scarcity is another built-in variable. Resources are limited. There is not enough of everything for everyone to have as much as they want. This is the core of countless human struggles, deciding whether to share or hoard, cooperate or compete. Scarcity pushes us into strategy, sometimes compassion, sometimes violence. In cooperative games, scarcity forces teamwork. In competitive ones, it forces cunning. On Earth, it forces both, all the time, a dual test that never resolves. Yet the rules aren't only about restriction, they also open doors. Opportunities exist to learn, to create, to travel, to begin again. But they always come with cost: time, energy, resources, and the rule of forward-moving time ensures you cannot pursue them all. You must choose, and in choosing, you reveal what matters most to you. Even chance itself feels like a rule, a mechanism built into the system. Random events appear without warning: a sudden storm, an unexpected meeting, a streak of luck, a burst of misfortune. From our perspective, they look like chaos. From the perspective of a test, they look like variables meant to unsettle the pattern, to see how participants react when the plan unravels. adaptability becomes visible only when chance intervenes. The rules, however, are not distributed equally. Not everyone begins at the same starting line. Some are born into safety, others into danger. Some arrive with wealth and health, others with poverty or illness. To human eyes, this seems unfair. To a designer, it might be deliberate. By scattering starting conditions, you see not only how advantage shapes outcomes, but whether determination, ingenuity, or solidarity can bridge the gap. That variety is what makes the data meaningful. It is as if every life were a separate trial within the same larger experiment, each beginning in a different lab setup, but contributing to the same overarching question. What does a species do with what it is given? The hardest part is that there is no handbook. We never receive a list of rules, no clear criteria for passing or failing. We must infer them through experience, through the echoes of culture, through the whispers of intuition. Sometimes we believe we have discovered a loophole, only to find later that it was another part of the test, a scenario meant to measure what we do when tempted by an easy win. Sometimes we convince ourselves that luck is blind, only to notice how often chance forces us into crossroads where character is revealed. And yet, that uncertainty may be the point. If we knew exactly what was being measured, we could tailor our behaviour to meet it. Without knowing, our actions expose our true priorities. The way we live shows what we value, not what we think will earn us a better score. Even so, perhaps the process of learning the rules is itself one of the central challenges. Some people live as though rules don't exist, drifting through life with little thought to larger meaning. Others dedicate themselves to unravelling the system, searching for patterns in religion, philosophy, or science. Some find comfort in destiny, others in rebellion. Each approach is revealing in its own way. From the perspective of a watcher, what matters may not be whether you guessed the rules correctly, but how you behaved in the face of not knowing them. That is where the test sharpens into something more profound, less about success, more about authenticity. And once you see the rules not as chains but as a framework, life itself changes. Instead of feeling trapped by inevitability, you can recognize the space for choice. Instead of despairing at randomness, you can view it as an opportunity to reveal hidden strengths. Instead of resenting loss, you can acknowledge it as part of a pattern that has always been with us. The rules are not an answer sheet, but the boundaries of the game. And within those boundaries, the story of humanity unfolds, messy, contradictory, and deeply revealing. When you begin to consider life as a test, it's impossible not to look at the stories we've told about ourselves since the beginning of memory. Long before telescopes measured the stars or scientists mapped the genes that coil inside our cells, humanity reached for meaning through story. Around fires, in temples, on the walls of caves, we spoke of existence, not as a blank accident, but as a path lined with trials. In ancient Egypt, the image of the heart placed on scales beside the feather of Ma'at told every soul that their life was weighed, that their actions mattered, that death itself was not escape, but judgment. In Greece, philosophers wrestled with the notion that the soul could refine itself through earthly experience, that courage, temperance, and justice were not gifts but qualities tested through effort. In ancient China, Confucian thinkers described life as a continual exercise, a daily evaluation of how one behaved within family, community, and state. It was not a matter of heaven or hell, but of whether balance was maintained, whether a person fulfilled their role in harmony with others. Indigenous traditions across the Americas, Africa, and Oceania spoke of journeys filled with obstacles, meant to teach endurance and humility, seeing hardship not as punishment, but as a step toward wisdom. In each of these, the theme repeats. Existence is not random, it is trial. Religions born later, grounded in written scriptures, only sharpened that message. The Quran described life as a test from God, every act recorded, every belief weighed. Christianity placed before believers the image of judgment, salvation, or damnation, hinging on how one lived. Hindu philosophy framed life in the endless cycle of samsara, where karma is both the record and the mechanism of the exam. Each birth another attempt, each death another result tallied before the next beginning. Even when the language shifts, the essence remains. Life is a proving ground. What's remarkable is not the differences, but the persistence of the same shape of thought across time and distance. It's as though, scattered and unconnected, human cultures kept stumbling into the same whisper. You are being tested. What does that say about us? Perhaps it is evidence of an underlying truth, sensed but not seen, like a faint vibration running beneath the surface of reality. Or perhaps it is a reflection of the human need to give shape to suffering, to believe that hardship is not empty but purposeful. A famine, a plague, a betrayal. These become bearable if they are steps on a path, questions on an exam, lessons in disguise. If life is only chaos, pain feels cruel, but if life is trial, pain feels revealing. Yet there is another way to read it. What if embedding the belief in tests was itself part of the design? If you wanted to steer behaviour without constant intervention, what better tool than the conviction that everything is watched, weighed, and judged? A person who believes their actions matter beyond the moment is less likely to act with reckless cruelty, more likely to cultivate virtues praised by their community. The test becomes self-reinforcing because the idea of it shapes conduct whether or not the observer exists. That possibility opens unsettling questions. If belief systems are themselves variables in the experiment, then the differences between them may not be flaws, but features. One culture says faith is the key, another says virtue, another says harmony with nature, and still another insists on ritual and obedience. If you were an observer designing a test, scattering contradictory instructions would be a way to see how people respond, both alone and when their cultures collide. And history is full of collisions. Civilizations have met with open arms, exchanging goods and knowledge, and they have met with swords and fire, each convinced their answer was the only true one. Both outcomes are telling. Both yield data about how humans handle difference. If the test is real, then the point may not be which rules are followed, but how people act when rules compete. Look closer, and you see how deeply these narratives have guided entire civilizations. Laws were written with divine tests in mind. Art was created as testimony to faith. Wars were fought to prove allegiance to one path over another. Even now, long after many ancient cultures have faded, their ideas echo in modern life. Self-help philosophies, secular reflections, even the way we speak about life lessons, carry the shadow of the same belief, that we are here to improve, to learn, to prove something. The test has never disappeared. It has only changed its vocabulary. And maybe that is the most revealing sign of all. Across continents, across millennia, across languages, humanity keeps circling back to the same question. What is this for? If Earth is a test, then these stories are not just folklore. They are part of the apparatus, instruments within the exam itself. They frame human choices, push communities to act in certain ways, and create systems of reward and punishment long before any external observer has to intervene. They are like questions whispered by the test into our own imaginations, questions that demand answers in the form of lives lived. This persistence is perhaps why the idea never fully fades. Even in an age of satellites and quantum physics, even with data at our fingertips, we still reach for the same structure, that there is meaning, that our actions echo, that existence is more than survival. It could be instinct or it could be memory, a faint echo from the moment the stage was first set. And so when you sit quietly with the thought, if life is a test, your mind drifts, not just to your own story, but to the long sweep of human belief. You notice how often we have cast ourselves as students, as pilgrims, as souls weighed or refined. You realise that the exam may not have begun with you at all. It may have been going on since the first myths were told, since the first ancestor gazed at the stars and asked why. You recognise that you're part of something older, wider, and perhaps far stranger than you imagined. And that realisation itself might be one of the questions, a measure not of knowledge, but of awareness. If stories have always suggested that life is trial, then the next question is whether anyone is actually watching. An exam, after all, implies not only questions, but observers, proctors, graders, who, if anyone, might be looking in on this planet and its billions of lives. The oldest answer is divine. For millennia, humans imagined gods, spirits, or ancestors peering through the veil of existence, tallying deeds and weighing hearts. In that frame, every act mattered because it was seen, every thought whispered into a void that listened. For many, this remains comforting. The idea that no kindness goes unnoticed, that no cruelty escapes account. Others imagined watchers of another kind, distant intelligences, not of heaven, but of the stars. In that version, we are less disciples than specimens, studied as carefully as scientists study ants on a hillside. And then there is the third, unnerving possibility, that the watchers are ourselves, projected forward in time, using some future technology to reconstruct the past, peering back at ancestors as both subject and teacher. Each of these possibilities is wild, yet none can be completely dismissed without assuming certainty we do not possess. If there are watchers, they have been discreet, no thundering voice across the sky, no undisputed apparition that halts the world in agreement. Instead, there are hints, ambiguous and slippery, lights in the sky that leave no trace, visions claimed by mystics, easily dismissed as dreams, moments when events line up too neatly, too strangely, to feel random. For some, these are proof. For others, coincidence. And perhaps that ambiguity is the point. In a true experiment, you do not tell subjects what you're measuring, because knowledge distorts results. If Earth is a test, the veil of uncertainty might be deliberate. Some people see signs everywhere, others nowhere, and both reveal something different. Think about how experiments work in our own world. A psychologist may tell participants they are being tested for memory while really observing cooperation. A teacher may assign an exercise that seems to measure skill but is really watching for persistence. If the watchers exist, what they appear to do may not be their true goal. Perhaps they show just enough of themselves to see how we react. Do we worship, dismiss, fear, or seek contact? Each response is data. Each interpretation, another line in the record. The extraterrestrial hypothesis has its own strange logic. Somewhere in the galaxy, or perhaps in another, an advanced civilization may have set aside worlds like preserves, observing them over eons as living experiments. From their perspective, we might not be much different from wildlife tagged and tracked, each migration, each behaviour mapped. The unsettling part is imagining that our tags are not physical at all, but embedded in the reality we experience. A flicker of chance, a subtle nudge in history, a small shift in circumstance, all invisible to us, but clear to them as cause and effect. If this sounds like science fiction, remember how often science has transformed fiction into reality. Satellites, genetic maps, artificial intelligence, all once seemed fantastical. Who is to say observation from the outside is impossible? The idea of future humans watching us is perhaps even stranger. If time travel ever becomes possible, or if simulation technology can reconstruct entire eras, then we might be living inside a model of our own past. Imagine every detail recreated, every person simulated with such precision that we believe ourselves real. To the watchers, our struggles would be history replayed, a chance to test hypotheses, to see what might have changed had one small variable shifted. And if that is true, then the watchers are not strangers at all, but our descendants, sitting silently outside the simulation, taking notes on the lives of their long-gone ancestors. It is a dizzying thought that we may be reenacting the past while believing it the present. Then there is the simulation hypothesis, perhaps the most unsettling of all. In this vision, our entire world is code, a program running with such detail that we cannot detect its edges. Physics are rules, events are parameters, and life itself is software executed on a machine we cannot perceive. If this were the case, then the watchers are not just recording results. They control the framework. The laws of gravity, the constants of chemistry, the very unfolding of history could all be lines in a program written elsewhere. In that light, the test becomes not just life within reality, but reality itself. What is real if the rules are scripted? What is choice if every possibility is encoded? Of course, ambiguity remains. Every strange light may be an illusion. Every story of visions may be imagination. Every coincidence may be coincidence. Yet the persistence of these possibilities suggests they fill a need, a shape in the human mind that refuses to stay empty. We keep asking, are we alone? Are we watched? And even without answers, the act of asking changes the way we live. If you believe you're observed, you may behave differently. Strive harder, act with care. If you believe you are unseen, you may act freely, recklessly, perhaps honestly. Both positions matter, both reveal. What would the watchers, if they exist, care about? If divine, perhaps they seek morality, compassion, justice, integrity, even when difficult. If extraterrestrial, perhaps they seek scientific insight, studying how a species develops technology, governance, or war. If human descendants, perhaps they seek to understand history's turning points, when we stumbled into disaster or pulled ourselves back from the edge. Some may imagine the watchers as archivists, recording everything like historians, others as examiners, testing outcomes and drawing conclusions. The truth, if there is one, remains behind the veil. From our perspective, their intentions are unknowable. Are they rooting for us, hoping we succeed? Are we one of countless tests, no more central than any other? Or are we entertainment, like characters in a story repeated for someone else's amusement? We cannot know. But the uncertainty itself may be a condition. It forces us to live as though the question matters, even when we lack the answer. That tension, that state of unknowing, is perhaps the sharpest edge of the exam. And so, when you stand beneath the night sky staring at stars so distant their light left long before you were born, you may feel it. the sense of being both insignificant and observed. A small being on a small world, yet possibly part of something vast, deliberate, hidden. Whether you call the Watchers gods, aliens, ancestors, or coders, the question lingers. If someone is out there, what are they learning from us? What story do our choices tell? And if no one is out there, if no one watches, does the test vanish? Or does it remain, written not in their eyes, but in our own? If we follow the thought further, we cannot ignore the role of civilization itself. It is tempting to see civilization as a natural outgrowth of survival, a gradual layering of farming, building, trading, and governing that led us from small bands of hunter-gatherers to vast interconnected nations. But if Earth is a test, civilization may be more than backdrop. It may be the testing instrument itself, a mechanism that raises the level of difficulty as the exam goes on. In the beginning, the challenges were simple but immediate. Can you find food? Can you light fire? Can you endure a winter? Once those were mastered, the stage shifted. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, and with each expansion, new questions appeared. Could humans coexist with strangers? Could they share resources at scale? Could they build laws that extended beyond family or tribe? Civilization is like an evolving syllabus, each stage introducing harder problems. Feeding a family became feeding thousands. Settling disputes with a neighbour became negotiating among nations. Defending yourself from a predator became balancing diplomacy, trade, and war. The exam questions multiplied, deepened, and began to test qualities not only of individuals, but of systems. Systems are fragile, and they reveal themselves most clearly under strain. Governments rise promising order, then collapse under corruption or rigidity. Economies flourish with invention, then falter when inequality grows too sharp. Religions inspire compassion, then fracture into conflict over interpretation. Education systems enlighten generations, then stagnate when they fail to adapt. Each one is like a trial run of an idea. Does equality strengthen society, or does hierarchy? What happens when power concentrates in the hands of a few? How do people respond when opportunity is unevenly distributed? Each structure is an experiment within the larger experiment, its success or failure logged across centuries. If there are watchers, they would not need to adjust much. Simply letting humans build and rebuild their civilizations provides data in abundance. Look at cities, for example. To us, they are centres of opportunity, culture, and progress. But they are also pressure cookers, packing millions into tight quarters, testing patience, cooperation, tolerance. Trade connects continents, offering both temptation and possibility, greed or generosity, exploitation or exchange. Technology expands human reach, giving tools powerful enough to save lives or destroy them in numbers unimaginable. Civilization forces these dilemmas upon us. You cannot live entirely outside of it. Even hermits in the wilderness feel the ripple of choices made far away. The global economy, the shifting climate, the laws of nations, all reach into lives whether welcomed or not. In that sense, civilization is a cage we built together, one that doubles as a laboratory for observing what we do when choices overlap and consequences spill beyond individuals. From one perspective, history is a sequence of civilizations trying out answers. Some embraced empire, holding power through conquest. Some emphasized democracy, attempting to share authority. Some bound themselves in strict religious codes, others in mercantile contracts, others in monarchies and dynasties. None lasted forever. All eventually met decline. whether through invasion, famine, mismanagement, or internal fracture. To us, this cycle feels tragic, but to an observer, it might be the point. Testing resilience, creativity, adaptability, not just of individuals, but of entire societies. Do we learn from mistakes? Do we repeat them? What kinds of ideas survive collapse and rise again? These questions echo across millennia, from Mesopotamia to Rome to modern powers. If civilization is part of the exam, then each empire, each republic, each kingdom is another essay response written on the scroll of time. Conflict reveals another layer. Civilization does not erase violence, it magnifies it. With more people, more resources, more complexity, disagreements expand. Wars erupt not only over food and land, but over ideology, faith, pride, and fear. From a testing view, this is another deliberate pressure point. How do humans resolve disputes at scale? Do they create institutions of peace? And if so, do those institutions endure? Or do they slide again and again into war, unable to rise above old instincts? The answers vary, and that variation itself is data. For every attempt at cooperation, there is a war. For every treaty signed, one broken. From an exam perspective, each conflict is a question asked in blood. What will you choose when stakes are highest? Yet civilization also produces some of humanity's brightest achievements. Works of art that capture beauty and sorrow, philosophies that search for truth and justice, scientific breakthroughs that expand the horizon of what is possible. The same hands that build weapons also build cathedrals and spacecraft. The same minds that invent systems of control also imagine systems of liberation. To a watcher, these contradictions may be the most revealing feature of all. A species capable of cruelty and compassion in equal measure, destruction and creation side by side, might be exactly the kind of subject worth studying. What makes the picture even more compelling is how civilizations influence each other. Rarely do they remain sealed. Through trade, conquest, migration, and exploration, ideas spread. Languages mingle, religions merge, technologies leap from one culture to another. Each encounter is another test within the test. Do cultures integrate, enriching each other, or do they clash, leaving scars of war? Both outcomes, again, are revealing. A species that can absorb difference shows one kind of potential. A species that collapses under it shows another. The watchers, if they exist, might be less concerned with victory or loss than with the range of responses produced. Today, civilizations are more connected than ever. A decision made in one corner of the world can ripple globally in hours. Financial systems, communication networks, ecological impacts, everything is intertwined. From a testing perspective, this may be the final escalation. No longer are societies isolated, able to fail or thrive independently. Now the species must face questions together. Can humanity cooperate across borders, across beliefs, across conflicting interests? Can it balance the needs of billions without tearing itself apart? Or will global interconnection become the ultimate trap, where collapse in one region drags the rest into ruin? This level of challenge seems almost scripted, as though the exam has entered its most advanced stage. From where we stand, the outcome is uncertain. Some signs suggest hope: international cooperation on science, humanitarian aid, moments of shared wonder when the planet looks back at itself from space. Other signs suggest danger: rising tensions, fragile ecosystems, technology outpacing wisdom. Perhaps both are necessary. Perhaps the exam is not designed for easy triumph, but to measure how we navigate contradictions that may never fully resolve. Civilization, in this frame, is less about achieving perfection and more about showing what we do with imperfection. Do we innovate, compromise, imagine new possibilities, or do we collapse under the weight of our own complexity? Each answer is written not in theory but in history, etched into the record of who we have been. When you look at civilization this way, it no longer feels like a random accumulation of progress. It feels like a classroom that reshapes itself, like a set of lessons that grow harder with each generation. And if someone is watching, then perhaps they are not waiting for a final exam, but are already reading every page as it is written. If civilization is the classroom, then suffering is one of its most persistent lessons. It weaves itself into every generation, in every place, under every system. No matter how far technology advances, no matter how rich or powerful a society becomes, suffering finds a way to appear, carving its marks into individual lives and collective histories alike. It arrives in obvious forms: hunger when harvests fail, illness when medicine lags behind, war when rivalries boil over. It arrives quietly too, in loneliness, in fear, in guilt, in the slow erosion of hope, when problems seem endless. In thinking of Earth as a test, suffering becomes less an accident and more a designed variable. One of the hardest modules, the one that cannot be skipped. A test without hardship is no test at all. Consider how suffering functions in human life. Physical pain alerts us to danger, but it also teaches caution. Emotional pain shapes empathy, allowing us to recognize ourselves in others' struggles. Loss forces adaptation, driving people to rebuild, to find new meaning when the old one disappears. From this angle, suffering is not a flaw in the system, but one of its central mechanisms. It reveals what we cling to, what we let go of, how deeply we can bend without breaking. A life of comfort alone would leave those questions unanswered. A life touched by suffering insists on answers, whether we want to give them or not. History is thick with examples. Pandemics that decimated populations also transformed medicine and governance. Wars that scarred continents also reshaped borders, alliances, and ideals. Famines that starved millions drove innovation in agriculture and distribution. Each era of collective pain left behind not only wounds, but unexpected growth. From a testing perspective, this might be the point. Not that suffering is good or desirable, it never is, but that it is revealing. Do we collapse in despair or find ways to endure? Do we turn on each other or reach for solidarity? The answers differ, and in those differences the full picture of humanity emerges. Yet suffering also exposes the starkest contradictions. For every person who responds with compassion, another responds with cruelty. Disasters can bring strangers together in selfless aid, or they can spark looting and violence. Hardship can deepen humility or ignite arrogance. It is this duality that makes suffering such a potent measure. The same event, the same loss, can produce entirely opposite outcomes, and the divergence says as much about human nature as the pain itself. If Earth is a test, then suffering is the question, written in bold, the one that cannot be ignored, the one that reveals most sharply who we are. On the personal scale, suffering reshapes perspective. A broken bone heals, but the memory of vulnerability lingers. The loss of a loved one changes the rhythm of days forever, teaching both fragility and resilience. A failure in ambition humbles, redirects, forces creativity. None of these moments feel like blessings when they arrive. Yet over time, many people look back and see that their hardest experiences shaped them more than their easy victories. It is almost as if the design of suffering is not simply to wound but to mould, to push growth that would not have happened otherwise. If you frame life as a test, then every pain becomes a prompt. How will you respond now? Collectively, suffering tests systems as much as individuals. When a city is struck by disaster, do its leaders respond swiftly or falter in denial? When inequality grows unbearable, do societies reform or collapse? When disease spreads, do we hoard cures or share them? In these questions, governments, economies, and cultures are all revealed. Weaknesses surface, strengths shine through, and the observers, if they exist, gain their clearest data. The exam is not only about people, it is about the structures they create, and suffering is the pressure that shows what those structures are made of. There is another layer, more difficult to accept. Much suffering is not delivered by nature, but inflicted by humans upon one another. Violence, exploitation, neglect, these are choices, not accidents. If Earth is a test, this may be its sharpest question. What do we do with the power to harm? Do we choose cruelty, or do we restrain ourselves? Do we exploit the weak, or do we protect them? Every act of harm and every act of kindness becomes part of the record. It is here, perhaps more than anywhere, that the test reveals itself most clearly, because suffering caused by others is not inevitable, it is chosen, which means it is where morality, empathy, and courage are most visible. Even the way suffering links people together seems deliberate. Shared hardship has a strange power to collapse distance. Soldiers who survive battle form bonds deeper than family. Communities devastated by disaster often rebuild with unity unthinkable before the catastrophe. Strangers in crisis may suddenly see each other as human in a way daily life never allowed. Suffering, for all its cruelty, can also be a bridge, but it can just as easily divide. Pain can breed resentment, mistrust, hatred. Entire generations have carried bitterness from old wounds, passing it down like inheritance. The dual nature of suffering makes it not only unavoidable, but perfect as a testing tool. It offers no single path. It forces choice. The unsettling possibility is that suffering is not incidental, but intentional. If life were meant only for pleasure, suffering would be a flaw. If life is a test, suffering is a feature. That thought is heavy, almost unbearable, yet it aligns with what humans have intuited for centuries. Our stories, our religions, our philosophies have always treated suffering as trial, as refinement, as proof. What if those intuitions were not just comfort, but recognition? What if we were always meant to see suffering as the question, the condition against which the real answers of our lives are written? It does not make pain easier to endure. It does not soften the sharp edge of grief or fear, but it shifts the lens through which you see it. A broken moment may no longer feel like meaningless chaos, but as part of a pattern that tests who you are when nothing is easy. And that shift itself is revealing, because whether you embrace or reject the idea, your response is recorded. That may be the ultimate paradox. Even questioning whether suffering has meaning may itself be part of the test. If suffering is one axis of the test, then wonder is its counterweight. Humanity does not live only in pain. It lives in astonishment, in the unexplainable beauty that seems woven into the very fabric of existence. A sunrise spilling gold across the horizon, the first laugh of a child, the sudden rush of awe when you look up and see the stars. These moments feel almost too generous, as if life is offering glimpses of something far greater than survival. If Earth is a proving ground, then wonder is not decoration but another kind of examination. It asks, what do you notice? What do you value? Do you look only at what hurts, or do you allow yourself to be moved by what astonishes? From the earliest cave paintings to the most complex symphonies, wonder has been the catalyst. Early humans painted bison on stone walls, not simply to record a hunt, but to express awe at the creatures that fed them. Ancient builders raised monuments toward the sky, their scale designed less for practicality and more for awe. Philosophers gazing into night skies asked questions still unanswered. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is beauty itself such a universal experience? If the test is real, then wonder is one of its more subtle tasks. It doesn't demand survival skills or endurance. It demands openness. Can you stand in front of mystery and feel it without reducing it to utility? Consider how wonder shapes knowledge. Every scientific revolution began with someone who noticed something ordinary and asked an extraordinary question. Newton saw an apple fall, but he wondered about gravity. Galileo pointed a telescope upward, but what he truly did was follow his wonder at the moon's imperfect surface. Curiosity is the engine of discovery, and wonder is its spark. If humans were meant only to endure, curiosity would be unnecessary. But if they are here to be tested, then curiosity is central. It is the bridge between what is and what could be. The test asks not only how you suffer, but how you marvel. Yet wonder also holds danger. Like suffering, it can split along dual paths. Some who gaze at the stars feel humility, recognizing the smallness of human life within the vast cosmos. Others gaze upward and feel entitlement, a drive to dominate, to control, to treat the universe as something to conquer. Wonder can inspire reverence, or it can ignite arrogance. The pyramids, breathtaking in their grandeur, still carry whispers of power concentrated in the hands of the few. Cathedrals lift the spirit skyward, but remind us that awe has often been harnessed as a tool of authority. If the test is designed, then wonder may be its trickiest component. What do you do with what amazes you? Do you cherish it, protect it, share it, or do you seek to own it? On a smaller scale, wonder has an almost medicinal effect. People speak of awe as though it enlarges the soul, creating space for perspective. A weary worker might look at the ocean and for a moment feel both small and refreshed, reminded that life is larger than the struggle of the day. A child seeing snow for the first time experiences a joy untouched by history, politics, or responsibility. These moments of wonder seem like breath written into the test, pauses that restore, invitations to remember that life is not only trial, but also gift. If the examiners exist, perhaps they are not cruel but balanced, ensuring that for every measure of pain, there is also a measure of astonishment. History again offers hints. The Renaissance, often remembered for art and science, was at its core a rediscovery of wonder. People looked back at ancient Greece and Rome, not just for knowledge, but for inspiration, marvelling at what human hands and minds could achieve. The Enlightenment, though grounded in reason, was also driven by the wonder of discovery. New lands, new species, new ideas. Even revolutions were sparked by wonder. The wonder that life could be freer, that society could be fairer, that a better world was possible. Wonder is not passive. It stirs action, sometimes quietly, sometimes explosively. The test may well measure not only whether we feel wonder, but what we do with it. There is also the wonder embedded in relationships. Falling in love is as much an experience of awe as of intimacy. Friendship, in its best form, carries a quiet amazement at another's presence in your life. Even simple kindnesses, a stranger holding open a door, a neighbour offering help, can strike us with sudden gratitude, a recognition that goodness itself is something wondrous. These human-scale moments balance the grandeur of galaxies. They are reminders that wonder is not only found in vastness, but also in the ordinary, if one is willing to notice. Still, like suffering, wonder resists permanence. Awe fades. The first time you see the ocean, it overwhelms you. The 10th time, it feels familiar. The risk is not that wonder disappears, but that we stop noticing it. If the test has layers, perhaps one of them is this. Do you remain open to wonder even after repetition, even when the extraordinary becomes ordinary? Children excel at this. They marvel at the same butterfly again and again, while adults pass by without a glance. Perhaps the examiners are watching not for grand gestures, but for the persistence of awe, for the ability to remain astonished despite routine. In the end, wonder asks as much of us as suffering does. It asks us to be present, to see beyond necessity, to allow mystery to shape us. It asks whether we respond with humility or hubris, with creation or consumption. In this light, the test is balanced. Suffering strips us down to what we can endure, while wonder lifts us up to what we can imagine. Together, they create the conditions of humanity's examination, pain to sharpen, or to expand. If there is a purpose, it might lie in how these two forces intertwine, guiding us to see not only what life demands, but also what it offers. And so, as we move deeper into this journey, the question lingers. Are these moments of wonder, these sudden intrusions of beauty, deliberate? Were they placed here to soften the weight of trial, or are they the trial itself, testing whether we can remain open-hearted in a world that bruises us? The answer, as always, may not be clear, but the experience itself continues to shape who we are and how we are being measured. If suffering tests endurance and wonder tests openness, then perhaps memory is the third axis of this invisible trial. Memory does more than preserve. It reshapes the past into something living, binding together individuals and civilizations alike. Without memory, there would be no continuity, no culture, no sense of self. Every myth, every history, every whispered story told by firelight is not merely a recollection, but a thread in the fabric of human existence. If the test is real, then memory is the scorecard by which our lives are marked. Not simply what happens to us, but what we choose to remember and how we carry it forward. At the personal level, memory defines identity. You know who you are because you remember who you were. A favourite childhood place, the face of someone long gone, the sting of past mistakes, all of it shapes the present self. Strip away memory and you strip away continuity. Without it, there is no lesson learned, no growth, no meaning. This is why amnesia feels so haunting in stories. It is not just the loss of information, but the loss of the very thread of self. If the test is designed, memory ensures that experience is not wasted. It is the mechanism that insists pain must teach and wonder must inspire. Otherwise, both dissolve into nothing. Civilizations, too, are held together by memory. Nations rise around shared histories, real or imagined, and collapse when those histories are forgotten or denied. The oral traditions of indigenous peoples, the chronicles of medieval monks, the carved inscriptions of empires long vanished. Each is an act of defiance against the erosion of time. Memory, in this sense, is resistance. It is the refusal to let the test's challenges be erased. If humanity is being observed, then perhaps what is truly being watched is how carefully we tend to memory. Do we honour it, distort it, or neglect it? But memory is slippery. It does not record with the precision of a machine. It edits, softens, exaggerates. Two people can witness the same event and carry away two different memories. Entire societies can rewrite their past to justify the present. Consider how regimes have reshaped history to consolidate power, erasing inconvenient truths, elevating myths above facts. In these cases, memory becomes less a record and more a tool. The test may not simply be about whether we remember, but whether we remember honestly. Can we confront uncomfortable truths in our shared memory, or do we choose only to recall what flatters us? On an intimate scale, memory is coloured by emotion. A song from years ago can bring tears in an instant, not because of the song itself, but because of the memory it unlocks. The smell of wood smoke, the taste of a dish cooked long ago, can transport us through time more powerfully than any archive. Memory is not merely stored, it is lived again. If the test is to measure humanity's capacity for meaning, memory ensures that even fleeting moments carry weight far beyond their duration. There is also collective forgetting, the shadow side of memory. Traumas too painful to carry are sometimes buried, both by individuals and by societies. Yet forgetting does not erase, it festers. Cultures that refuse to remember their atrocities risk repeating them. Families that silence painful stories risk transmitting their wounds invisibly across generations. Perhaps the examiners, if they exist, are watching this too. Do we dare remember what hurts not only to ourselves, but to others? Or do we erase, deny, and let the cycle continue? In this way, memory becomes not just recollection, but responsibility. Religion and philosophy have long grappled with memory's power. Ancient Egyptians believed the soul lived on as long as the name was remembered. To be forgotten was a second death, more final than the grave. In Eastern traditions, memory is woven into cycles of rebirth. What you remember or fail to remember determines the shape of your return. Modern psychology, too, recognizes memory as central to healing. Trauma therapy is less about erasing pain than about integrating it, remembering differently so that the past no longer dominates the present. Across all these perspectives, memory is not passive storage, but active shaping. It builds, it warns, it haunts, it heals. Technology has complicated this relationship. Humanity now externalizes memory into machines, creating archives of data far beyond what any individual brain can hold. Social media preserves moments that might otherwise fade, transforming personal memory into public record. But does storing more mean remembering better? Or does the flood of captured images dilute meaning, replacing lived memory with curated fragments? If the test once measured how memory carried forward through fragile human minds, perhaps it now measures how we navigate abundance. In a world where everything can be recorded, the question becomes, what do we choose to truly remember? At its most profound, memory is tied to legacy. People rarely ask to be remembered for their wealth or possessions. They hope to be remembered for love, for kindness, for influence that outlasts them. Monuments rise for this reason, but so do simpler legacies, recipes passed down, letters preserved, values taught. Memory ensures that even when individuals vanish, something of them endures. The test may hinge on this, not only how we live, but how we are remembered, and what traces we leave in the memory of others. And so memory sits alongside suffering and wonder as a central part of the examination. Suffering ensures that nothing is easy, wonder ensures that nothing is empty, and memory ensures that nothing is lost. Together, they form a triad of forces that shape the human journey. Perhaps the examiners do not grade on achievements or failures, but on how well we integrate these three: enduring pain without losing hope, embracing awe without succumbing to arrogance, remembering honestly without drowning in the past. In the end, memory confronts us with a sobering truth. We do not control whether life tests us, but we do control what we carry forward. The stories we tell, the lessons we pass down, the memories we preserve, they are the record of how we met the trial. And if the test is real, then memory may be the only part of us that answers when we are gone. If memory is the record of our journey, then perhaps choice is the engine that drives it forward. Choice is what separates a test from a script. It is the difference between being actors, reading lines, and being shaping outcomes. Every path in human life, whether individual or collective, branches from the moment of decision. To some, this freedom feels liberating, to others terrifying, but in either case it carries weight. If existence is a trial, then choice is the constant question: what will you do with the moment in front of you? On a personal scale, choice defines character. Most choices are small and unremarkable, forgotten as quickly as they are made. What to eat for breakfast, which road to take home, whether to answer a call. Yet even these small decisions ripple outward, nudging the trajectory of life. Sometimes the smallest choice tilts destiny. A chance encounter because you walked down one street instead of another may lead to friendship, or love, or danger. In hindsight, the gravity of a choice becomes clear, but in the moment it is often invisible. If the test is subtle, it hides its hardest questions inside ordinary moments. Other choices announce themselves as heavy: to betray or to remain loyal, to fight or to surrender, to speak or to stay silent. These choices burn themselves into memory because they cost something, sometimes everything. History is full of such moments. Socrates drinking the hemlock rather than abandoning his pursuit of truth. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat, reshaping the moral fabric of a nation. These are remembered not only for the individuals who made them, but for the way they illuminated the power of human choice under pressure. In the framework of the trial, such moments are perhaps the most telling. When pressed, when cornered, what path do we carve? Yet choice is never made in a vacuum. It is entangled with circumstance, with history, with systems of power. A poor farmer in ancient Mesopotamia did not have the same array of choices as the king who ruled him. A child growing up in war does not have the same options as one growing up in peace. The examiners, if they exist, may be less interested in the range of choices available than in what one does with the little they have. It is easy to be generous when resources overflow. It is harder and perhaps more meaningful when generosity requires sacrifice. Choice also exposes paradoxes. We often believe we are free, yet countless decisions are shaped by forces we barely see: culture, biology, unconscious bias, the sway of crowds. Advertising plays on desires we did not know we had. Politics manipulates fears we cannot quite name. Traditions whisper what is acceptable before we realize we are listening. Are these truly our choices? Or are we responding to prompts planted long before? If life is a test, then perhaps one of its questions is whether we can discern genuine choice from the illusion of it. To awaken to the forces that shape us, and then choose consciously, may be the hardest task of all. Philosophers have long debated whether choice is real at all. Determinists argue that every decision is simply the inevitable consequence of prior events, neurons firing according to patterns set by genetics and environment. Free will, in this view, is a comforting illusion, but others argue that choice is undeniable, felt in the immediacy of action. When you stand at a crossroads, you experience the weight of possibility, even if unseen laws guide you there. Perhaps the truth lies in tension, that while much of life is scripted, pockets of freedom remain, like windows left ajar in a closed house. The test may not require absolute freedom, only enough to reveal who we are in those windows. Collective choice amplifies these dynamics. Nations choose paths in moments of crisis, toward war or toward peace, toward justice or oppression. These are not merely the sum of individual wills, but the confluence of leadership, pressure, fear, and hope. Consider the Cuban Missile Crisis, a handful of men, under unbearable strain, choosing between escalation and restraint. The fate of millions balanced on their decision. Collective choice can save or destroy on scales far larger than the individual. In such moments, the test's scope seems almost cosmic. What does humanity do when handed the power of annihilation? Choice also reveals character through omission. Not choosing is itself a choice. To remain silent in the face of injustice is to side with the status quo. To ignore suffering is to permit it. The test, then, is not only about the bold decisions that echo through time, but about the quiet refusals that shape the moral ground beneath us. History often judges harshly those who looked away. Perhaps the examiners do too. Technology has transformed the texture of choice. In the digital age, the abundance of options can be paralyzing. Endless feeds, countless identities, infinite distractions, choice multiplies until it becomes a burden. Psychologists call it decision fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from too much freedom. If once the test measured courage in the face of scarcity, perhaps now it measures clarity in the face of excess. To choose well, when overwhelmed by options, may be as difficult as choosing bravely under threat. There is also the dimension of moral choice. Most decisions are morally neutral, but some cut deep. Whether to exploit or to protect, to deceive or to tell the truth, to seek power or to serve. These choices echo beyond personal gain or loss. They shape trust, community, and the trajectory of civilizations. If the test's purpose is to reveal the essence of humanity, then moral choice is its sharpest lens. Do we default to selfishness, or can we rise above it? Do we bend under temptation, or stand firm? These are the questions that cannot be answered in theory, only in action. At the heart of choice lies uncertainty. You never know the full consequence of a decision when you make it. To choose is to leap into fog, guided only by instinct, values, or hope. That leap is what makes choice so profound. If we knew the outcome in advance, the weight would vanish. Perhaps that is why the test is designed this way, to ensure that choice remains real, precisely because it is shadowed by the unknown. In the end, choice completes the architecture of the trial. Suffering ensures we are challenged, wonder ensures we are awakened, memory ensures we are shaped, and choice ensures we are responsible. Together, these forces sketch the outline of humanity's examination. And if the examiners are watching, perhaps this is what they most want to see. Not perfection, not control, but the willingness to step forward into the fog and decide. If choice is the engine that drives the trial, then consequence is the shadow that always follows behind. Every decision plants a seed, and whether we notice it or not, those seeds grow into realities that shape the world we wake up in tomorrow. Some consequences are immediate, like touching fire and feeling pain, while others take years, decades, or even centuries to unfold. It is this delay, this gap between action and outcome, that gives the trial its depth. For if results always came instantly, we might never learn patience, responsibility, or the art of foresight. Consider how civilizations themselves are written by consequence. The fall of Rome did not arrive in a single catastrophic night, but in centuries of choices that slowly eroded its foundation. Corruption tolerated, ambition unchecked, enemies underestimated. Each generation inherited the consequences of those before them, and in turn added their own. The collapse became inevitable, not because of fate, but because consequence accumulated until it could no longer be ignored. This is the rhythm of history, empires rising not only from vision, but also from the delayed harvest of forgotten mistakes. In our own lives, the same principle applies. A lie told to protect oneself may seem trivial in the moment, yet later it corrodes trust, making relationships fragile. A careless word spoken in anger may linger in someone's mind for years, reshaping how they see you. Conversely, a small kindness, once extended, may grow into a bond that endures through hardship. Consequence does not always punish, it also rewards. It mirrors us back to ourselves, silently recording not just what we chose, but how we chose it. If the trial is meant to test us, consequence is its report card. What makes consequence so difficult is its unpredictability. We like to believe we can forecast outcomes, but life resists tidy equations. A risk that looks foolish may spark an unforeseen chain of opportunities. A careful, cautious decision may lead to stagnation. Even the most brilliant minds cannot fully control consequence. This uncertainty forces humility. We are reminded again and again that the test is not about mastery of life's formula, but about how we carry ourselves when the results defy our expectations. Philosophies across the world have tried to frame consequence in moral or cosmic terms. In Hindu thought, karma describes the law of cause and effect. Every action plants seeds that will eventually return as fruit, whether sweet or bitter. In Christianity, the concept of reaping what you sow echoes this truth, embedding it in divine justice. In Buddhism, consequence is tied to intention. The heart behind the act matters as much as the act itself. These traditions, though varied, all recognize the same core insight. Nothing is lost, everything circles back. Even if hidden for years, consequence has a way of catching up. Science, too, teaches consequence, though in its own language. Ecology shows us that every disruption, cutting a forest, draining a wetland, altering the climate, ripples outward, reshaping systems we depend on. The extinction of a single species may seem small until it cascades into famine, disease, or collapse. The lesson is the same as in philosophy. Choices matter, and they matter beyond what we can see. To live as though consequence does not exist is to gamble with invisible debts that will one day come due. But consequence is not only external, it is also internal. Neuroscience suggests that every action reshapes the brain, carving pathways that make repetition easier. Habits form, and with them, identities. Choose anger often enough, and anger becomes the default. Choose compassion often enough, and kindness becomes natural. The trial is not simply watching what we do, but observing what we become through what we do. Consequence, then, is both outer ripple and inner sculptor. History is full of cautionary tales about ignored consequences. The Easter Islanders, who felled their forests to erect great stone statues, only to find themselves without wood to build boats, starving on a barren island. The Mayans, whose agricultural expansion depleted their land until their cities fell silent. Each case is a reminder. Consequence does not negotiate. It arrives when it will, indifferent to excuses. To live well within the trial is not only to choose wisely, but to remember that the test extends beyond the horizon of our own lifetimes. Yet consequence can also surprise with grace. Some outcomes, though unintended, blossom into beauty. An artist's rejected work inspires generations after his death. A forgotten seed blown by wind into the corner of a ruined temple grows into a tree that shades pilgrims centuries later. These stories remind us that consequence is not a rigid judge, but a complex web. Some choices, even if made blindly, can give birth to wonders we never imagined. Perhaps part of the trial is to act with integrity even when we cannot see the outcome, trusting that something good may arise from it. Consequence also binds us together. Rarely do we bear the results of our choices alone. A parent's decision echoes in the lives of their children. A leader's mistake reverberates across generations. Even strangers feel the ripple of choices made continents away, as when the burning of forests alters weather for the whole globe. This shared burden is both heavy and sacred. It means that the trial is not isolated to the individual, but collective. How humanity fares is not only measured in personal consequence, but in the legacy we leave as a species. If we are, as some suggest, participants in a grand experiment, then consequence is its most intricate design. It ensures that no act is meaningless, no moment detached. It ties us into a living web where nothing disappears, only transforms. This might be the deepest lesson, that we cannot live as though our choices are islands, but must see them as threads in a vast unfolding tapestry. In the end, consequence is not merely punishment or reward. It is the mirror of reality itself. It shows us the reflection of what we have sown, magnified through time and space. It teaches that while we cannot control everything, we can guide something, our intent, our awareness, our willingness to bear the weight of our actions. Perhaps the true measure of the trial is not whether we avoid consequence, but whether we learn to walk with it, to grow from it, and to accept that it is part of the very fabric of existence. If consequence is the shadow, then time is the stage upon which the trial unfolds. Without time, there could be no test, no waiting, no growth. Time gives shape to our experience, stretching choices into stories, weaving scattered moments into a line that we can follow. It is the invisible river in which we swim, often unnoticed until we feel its current pulling us toward places we did not expect. Some cultures have described time as an arrow, flying forward without pause, while others have seen it as a circle, endlessly repeating seasons and cycles. Both views whisper truths about the way we live, that we move forward, and yet, in moving forward, we encounter echoes of what has already been. Think of time as the great teacher, patient yet relentless. Children become adults not overnight, but through thousands of days that layer upon one another. A seed becomes a tree only because time carves space for roots to spread, leaves to unfurl, storms to be endured. Without time, there would be no becoming. The trial would collapse into a single instant, and all meaning would vanish. Time forces us to wait, to struggle, to endure, and through endurance it shapes us. History itself is the story of humanity's dance with time. Civilizations rise with vigour, inventing, exploring, conquering, and then slowly fade into memory, leaving behind ruins, legends, and unanswered questions. The pyramids of Egypt, the walls of Babylon, the crumbled amphitheatres of Rome, these are time's footprints. They remind us that no power is permanent, that the stage will shift, and that what we build will one day belong to the past. In this sense, time humbles us, stripping away illusions of permanence. Yet it also offers continuity. Though empires fall, humanity endures, learning, forgetting, and learning again. On a personal level, time is more intimate. We mark it with birthdays, anniversaries, seasons of joy and grief. We count hours when waiting for news, days when recovering from heartbreak, years when chasing dreams. Time becomes the texture of life itself, and in the trial, this texture matters. To make choices is one thing, but to wait for the unfolding of those choices requires trust. It requires the ability to live in uncertainty, to accept that understanding may come later, or perhaps not at all. Philosophers have wrestled with the nature of time for centuries. Augustine once confessed that he knew what time was until he was asked to explain it. In Buddhism, time is seen as an illusion, a construct of the mind, while in physics, Einstein showed us that time bends and stretches, not absolute but relative, woven into the fabric of space itself. Each perspective, whether spiritual or scientific, suggests that time is far stranger than the ticking of a clock. Perhaps within the trial, time itself is part of the test, a variable designed to stretch our perception and challenge our patience. Consider how time alters meaning. A tragedy in the present can later be remembered as the turning point that led to resilience or transformation. A failure may, decades later, be seen as the very event that opened a new path. Time reframes what we thought was final. It teaches us that endings are not always endings, but beginnings in disguise. This is why patience is such a difficult but necessary virtue. It allows us to wait long enough for time to reveal the fuller picture. Time also carries the weight of mortality. Our lives are bounded by it, measured not in centuries, but in fragile decades. This awareness creates urgency. It pushes us to love before it is too late, to speak before silence arrives, to act before opportunity disappears. The trial, then, is sharpened by the knowledge that time is limited. Choices matter more precisely because we cannot undo them once the river has carried us downstream. If eternity were guaranteed, perhaps nothing would hold value. But with mortality, every moment glows with fragile importance. Cultures have found different ways to honour this truth. The Stoics of ancient Rome practiced memento mori, the reminder of death, not as despair, but as a call to live fully in the present. In Japan, the philosophy of mono no aware embraces the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, finding beauty in fleeting things, like cherry blossoms that fall after only a few days. These traditions do not fight against time, but bow to it, learning to see its passing not as an enemy, but as the very essence of meaning. Yet time is also a unifier. Across continents and cultures, no one escapes its rhythm. The wealthy cannot buy more hours. The powerful cannot command more days. In this way, time is the great equalizer of the trial, ensuring that all participants, regardless of status, are bound to the same limits. It does not matter where you're born, what language you speak, or what gods you pray to. Time moves forward for us all. And in that shared forward motion, humanity finds its collective story. Still, time can feel uneven. A moment of joy may vanish in an instant, while a season of sorrow drags endlessly. This distortion is not in time itself, but in our perception. Neuroscientists suggest that novelty slows time, making a year filled with new experiences feel longer, while routine speeds it up, making whole decades blur together. This means that the trial is not only about time as it is measured, but about how we live within it. To embrace novelty, to remain awake to each day, is to stretch our sense of life. To live in monotony is to let time pass unmarked, as if we were barely present in our own stories. Perhaps the deepest mystery of time is memory. We cannot step backward into the past, yet fragments of it live within us, shaping who we are. Memories are the echoes of choices, the imprints of consequence, stitched together into identity. They blur and shift, sometimes unreliable, yet they are the closest thing we have to time travel. They allow us to revisit, to learn, to feel again what once was. And through memory, the trial ensures that no moment is entirely lost. It is carried forward, stored in the mind, waiting for reflection. The question then is how we use our time. Do we spend it chasing shadows, or do we pause to notice the light? Do we waste it fearing what cannot be stopped, or do we embrace it as the very medium through which we are tested? Time, like consequence, does not bend to our will, but we can bend ourselves to meet it, learning to walk with its current rather than against it. And perhaps in doing so, we glimpse the true lesson of the trial, that time is not our enemy, but our companion, guiding us toward the discovery of who we really are. If time is the stage of the trial, then memory is the script, though written in fading ink and prone to distortion. Memory is not a perfect recording, but a fragile reconstruction, stitched together by the mind from fragments, impressions, and emotions. What we remember shapes who we believe ourselves to be, while what we forget quietly dissolves into the background, leaving space for reinvention. The trial is not only about the choices we make, but about the way those choices are remembered, reinterpreted, and sometimes erased. Think about your earliest memory. It may be a vague image, a scent, a single frame rather than a moving scene. Over time, you may have filled in the gaps with imagination, stories told by others, or the longing to give it meaning. In this way, memory is not a fixed truth, but a living story that changes as we change. This is why two people can live through the same event and recall it in entirely different ways. The trial tests not only what we endure, but what version of it we carry forward. Cultures throughout history have understood the power of memory. Ancient bards were living archives, carrying entire epics in their minds and passing them down across generations. The Greeks even had a goddess of memory, Mnemosyne, whose name gave us the word mnemonic. To remember was to hold power. To forget was to risk losing identity. But forgetting too had its place. In Greek mythology, the river Lethe offered souls a chance to forget their earthly lives before being reborn. Forgetting was not only loss, but renewal, a chance to begin again without the weight of past mistakes. In our own lives, forgetting serves a similar function. Trauma, grief, or shame can fade with time, allowing us to heal and move forward. If memory preserved every detail with perfect clarity, we might be crushed beneath the weight of all we have seen and suffered. Forgetting is a mercy, just as remembering is a responsibility. The trial requires both, to hold on to what shapes us and to release what would destroy us. Science tells us that memory is plastic, endlessly reshaped each time it is recalled. To remember is not to play back a recording, but to rebuild it anew, influenced by our current emotions and perspectives. This means the past is never fully stable. It shifts each time we look at it. A childhood humiliation may later become a story of resilience. A youthful triumph may seem smaller in the light of adult experience. Memory evolves, and in that evolution, the trial deepens. It asks us to live not only with what happened, but with how we choose to remember it. There is also collective memory, the way groups, nations, or civilizations recall their shared past. Monuments, rituals, and holidays are not merely traditions, but anchors of identity. They tell people who they are by reminding them of where they came from. Yet collective memory can also be manipulated, rewritten, or erased. Empires have risen by glorifying certain histories and silencing others. Conquerors have burned libraries, toppled statues, and rewritten chronicles, not just to control the present, but to control the memory of the past. In this sense, the trial is not only personal, but societal. How communities remember or forget determines how they act in the present. Memory carries an emotional weight. A song can transport us back decades. A smell can unlock a forgotten corner of childhood. These sudden floods of memory remind us that the past is never fully gone, that it lingers just beneath the surface, waiting for the right key to unlock it. The trial, then, is not confined to the present moment. It extends backward, pulling memories forward to shape decisions we make today. But what of forgetting? Too often, forgetting is seen as weakness, but perhaps it is as essential as memory itself. Imagine a life where nothing could be forgotten. Every insult, every mistake, every pain permanently etched into awareness. Such a life would be unbearable. Forgetting is the silence between notes, the pause that allows music to be heard. It is the release that makes space for new beginnings. The trial gives us forgetting not as punishment, but as balance. There are dangers in both extremes. To remember everything is to be trapped in the past. To forget everything is to lose all sense of identity. The trial, in its design, seems to require a balance between the two. We must remember enough to learn, to carry wisdom forward, but forget enough to forgive, to heal, and to create space for the future. The shifting dance of memory and forgetting ensures that we are never static, always rewriting the script of who we are. Philosophers have often described identity as a continuity of memory. John Locke argued that the self is not the body, or even the soul, but the chain of consciousness that links past experiences through memory. If that is true, then forgetting threatens identity itself. But perhaps identity is not meant to be fixed. Perhaps we are meant to be fluid, to shed parts of ourselves and grow into others. The trial, then, is not about preserving a rigid self, but about navigating the delicate interplay of memory and forgetting, learning to carry what is necessary and release what is not. In moments of silence, when you close your eyes and drift into memory, you may notice how selective the mind truly is. You do not recall every meal you've eaten, every road you've walked, every conversation you've had. Instead, your memory highlights certain flashes, moments of intensity, whether joy or pain. This selectivity may be the trial's most subtle lesson. That meaning is not in everything, but in the things we choose to hold on to. Forgetting is the backdrop that makes remembering precious. Even dreams play their role here. They weave fragments of memory into surreal narratives, mixing the past with symbols and emotions. Some traditions believe dreams were messages from beyond, while modern science sees them as the brain's way of processing memory. Either way, dreams remind us that memory is not fixed but fluid, shifting like water, blurring lines between real and imagined. The trial is not only in waking life, but in the half-forgotten realm of dreams, where memory is reshaped in the shadows of sleep. Perhaps the final question is this: what memories will we choose to leave behind? When our time ends, what fragments of us will remain in the minds of others? Memory extends beyond the individual, carried forward in stories, names, photographs, or even in the ripples of influence we leave behind. To live, then, is also to plant memories in others. The trial ensures that we are never truly alone in our remembering, for even as we forget, others remember for us. And so, the trial continues. Each day adds new layers, new memories to carry, new moments to release. The balance between remembering and forgetting shapes not only our past but our future. For in the end, memory and forgetting are not opposites, but partners. Two hands weaving the tapestry of identity, two forces ensuring that the story never stops unfolding. If the waking world is the arena where the trial unfolds in clear daylight, then dreams are its hidden chambers, dimly lit and filled with echoes. In dreams, the ordinary boundaries of logic dissolve, and the mind arranges memory, desire, and fear into surreal sequences. What is strange is how convincing it all feels while we are inside it. A dream can carry the gravity of truth, the weight of revelation, even as it evaporates at dawn. This duality has long suggested to humanity that dreams are more than random fragments. They are messages, rehearsals, or even examinations woven into the trial itself. Ancient civilizations treated dreams with reverence. In Mesopotamia, kings consulted dream interpreters before making decisions of war or governance, believing the gods spoke through these nocturnal visions. The Egyptians catalogued dream symbols, treating them as portals into hidden truths. In the Bible, Joseph's ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams saved an entire kingdom from famine. Across cultures, from the indigenous peoples of the Americas to the shamans of Siberia, dreams were never dismissed as mere illusions. They were sacred texts written in the language of the subconscious. Yet dreams are not always grand revelations. Often they are deeply personal, stitched together from the threads of daily life. A face glimpsed in passing, a fragment of a conversation, the echo of a fear, all of it returns at night, rearranged in strange combinations. Science describes this as memory consolidation, the brain's way of sorting through the flood of experiences, discarding what is unnecessary and weaving the rest into lasting patterns. But perhaps the process is more than maintenance. Perhaps the trial uses dreams as mirrors, showing us what we cannot see while awake. There are dreams of falling, of being chased, of standing frozen as an unseen threat approaches. Such recurring visions are not random. They reveal where we feel powerless, where our choices weigh heavily. The trial, in these moments, extends beyond daylight decisions into the landscapes of the mind, testing us not only in action, but in imagination. To confront fear in a dream is to rehearse for its arrival in waking life. To glimpse joy in a dream is to be reminded that the trial is not only struggle, but also renewal. The subconscious is vast, and dreams are its surface currents. Beneath them lies something even deeper, the reservoir of unspoken desires, unresolved griefs, and unacknowledged truths. Carl Jung described this as the collective unconscious, a shared well of symbols and archetypes that reappear across cultures. The hero's journey, the wise elder, the trickster, these figures populate myths as well as dreams, suggesting that the trial is not only individual, but woven into humanity itself. Dreams, in this view, are reminders that each person's trial is connected to the greater human story. But dreams can also deceive. Just as memory reshapes itself, dreams can present illusions that feel profound but fade into confusion upon waking. Entire lifetimes can be lived in a single night, only to dissolve into a few scattered images by morning. The trial here is subtle, to learn not only from what dreams show, but from the very act of losing them. Perhaps forgetting a dream is itself part of the test, a reminder that not all truths are meant to be carried consciously. Some lessons may work quietly in the background, shaping us without our awareness. Lucid dreams, those rare nights when we realize we are dreaming, offer a glimpse of agency within the subconscious, to fly across impossible landscapes, to face a nightmare and change its course, to ask a question and receive an answer from a figure made of shadow. These are not merely fantasies, but explorations of choice within illusion. The trial seems to offer these lucid moments as a reminder. Even in the most unreal conditions, the ability to act, to decide, remains central. The freedom to choose persists, even when reality itself dissolves. Dreams have also served as sources of invention and creativity. The chemist Kekule dreamt of a snake biting its tail and awoke with the structure of the benzene ring. Paul McCartney claimed that the melody of yesterday came to him in a dream. Countless artists, writers, and scientists have carried insights from the dream world into the waking one. If the trial is meant to push humanity forward, then perhaps dreams are one of its most generous gifts, moments where imagination leaps beyond the constraints of reason and glimpses possibilities that daylight alone could not reveal. There is a shadow side to this gift, nightmares. Unlike ordinary dreams, nightmares grip the body with fear, jolting us awake with racing heart and shallow breath. They remind us that the subconscious is not only a storehouse of wonder, but of terror. Trauma often replays itself in dreams, unresolved and insistent. Nightmares may be cruel, but they force confrontation with what we might otherwise avoid. In this sense, they are among the trial's harshest instructors, stripping away pretense and placing us face to face with raw fear. Across cultures, people have sought to protect themselves from the darker currents of dreaming. Dream catchers, woven by indigenous peoples of North America, are believed to filter harmful visions and allow only the good to pass through. Rituals, prayers, and charms have been used for centuries to guard sleepers from nightmares. Even today, people keep journals by their beds, writing down dreams as if taming them by giving them shape. These practices acknowledge what the trial makes clear, that dreams are not passive events but encounters that demand attention, interpretation, and sometimes resistance. The most mysterious question of all is whether dreams connect us to something beyond ourselves. Many who have lost loved ones report seeing them again in dreams, as vivid as life, speaking words of comfort or warning. Are these only the mind's creations, or are they brief reunions granted through the hidden architecture of the trial? The line between psychology and mystery blurs here, reminding us that the trial is not always meant to be solved. Some questions are left open, beckoning us to wonder. In the end, dreams remind us that the trial is not confined to waking hours. It permeates every level of being, conscious and subconscious, seen and unseen. Every night, as the body rests, the mind enters another arena where lessons are taught in symbols and shadows. Whether we remember them or not, these nocturnal journeys shape who we are when we rise again. The trial does not sleep, and neither does the soul within it. And so we awaken, carrying fragments, some vivid, others already slipping away into the light of a new day. The trial continues, weaving dreams and waking life into a single fabric, reminding us that even in the stillness of night, the story is still unfolding. If dreams are the hidden chambers of the trial, then rituals are its public performances, the conscious attempts to reach toward the unseen. Every culture, no matter how isolated or distant in time, has created ceremonies meant to bridge the gap between the visible and the invisible, between the human and whatever forces might be guiding the test. Firelit dances, whispered prayers, offerings placed on altars. These gestures may seem different in form, yet they share the same intent: to make sense of the trial, to earn favour, to soften its harshness, or at least to feel less alone within it. Consider the simple act of lighting a candle. A flame is both fragile and enduring, consuming itself as it gives light. To those who perform this ritual, the candle becomes more than wax and wick. It is a symbol of presence, a way of saying, I see the darkness, but I will not let it consume me. In churches, temples, and households across centuries, such small flames have gathered into constellations of faith, each one an attempt to speak to the unseen examiners of the trial. Rituals also structure time. The cycle of festivals and holy days, harvest feasts, solstice celebrations, New Year rites, anchor human life within rhythms larger than individual days. They remind participants that the trial is not chaotic, but patterned, that even suffering has seasons, and that renewal follows loss. The Egyptian festival of Opet, the Roman Saturnalia, the Hindu Diwali, all of them different, yet all reflections of the same impulse: to step momentarily outside of ordinary life and acknowledge the larger design. Myths, in turn, provide the narratives that rituals enact. These stories are not just entertainment, they are blueprints for navigating the trial. In the Greek myth of Persephone, who spends part of the year in the underworld and part in the world above, people saw an explanation for the seasons, but also a metaphor for life's alternation between darkness and light. In the story of Gilgamesh, the great king's search for immortality becomes a mirror for every human confrontation with mortality. Myths endure because they encode truths that no single explanation can capture fully. Ritual and myth often meet in symbolic acts that seem irrational, yet feel deeply right. Take the ancient practice of burying grave goods with the dead. Pottery, weapons, ornaments, even food. Archaeologists can describe the practice as belief in an afterlife, but within the framework of the trial, it reveals something subtler: the instinct to continue the journey, to prepare for tests beyond death. The act itself is the lesson that life does not end at the visible horizon, and that choices echo into realms unseen. Symbolic practices also extend into daily life. The way one greets a stranger, shares a meal, or mourns a loss can all be rituals in miniature. A bow, a handshake, the breaking of bread. These gestures carry meaning beyond function, marking human interactions as sacred moments within the trial. In such rituals, people remind themselves, and each other, that existence is not only survival, but significance, that every meeting may hold a hidden question to be answered. At times, rituals take on immense complexity. The Mayan ball game, for example, was not merely sport but sacred drama. The ball's movement mirrored the path of the sun and the struggle of gods against darkness. Players became actors in a cosmic narrative, and sometimes in grim consequence, their lives were forfeit in sacrifice. To outside eyes, this may appear brutal, yet within its own world, it was a recognition that the trial is never only personal. Each person's fate is tied to the larger balance, and rituals were ways of aligning the individual with the cosmic order. Modern life often claims to have moved beyond ritual, yet it quietly creates its own. The singing of national anthems before sports games, the blowing out of candles on a birthday cake, the silent moment of reflection before a graduation. These are rituals in contemporary clothing, attempts to give structure and meaning to passages of time. Even in secular societies, the instinct to ritualize persists. because it is woven into the way humans navigate the trial. To mark a threshold, to create shared memory, is to affirm that life's events are not random but chapters in a story. But rituals can also mislead. When they become rigid, when the gesture outlives its meaning, ritual risks becoming empty repetition. The trial may allow such hollowness as part of its lesson, to test whether participants can distinguish form from essence, habit from true intention. The challenge is not to abandon ritual, but to keep it alive, to let it evolve without losing its depth. Each generation must ask, do these symbols still speak, or have they become only motions performed without heart? Symbols themselves hold a paradox. They are never the thing itself, only a pointer toward it. Yet they often carry more weight than the realities they represent. A flag becomes more than fabric. It embodies identity, sacrifice, and belonging. A cross, a crescent, a wheel of dharma, these images hold histories of devotion and conflict, uniting and dividing with equal power. The trial seems to use symbols as mirrors, reflecting the human tendency to invest meaning in objects and to be tested by how we treat that meaning. Even silence can be ritual. Monks in cloisters, shamans in trance, ordinary people bowing their heads before a meal, all recognize that not everything can be spoken. In silence, participants of the trial confront themselves, hearing the unfiltered murmur of their own thoughts. Such rituals remind us that noise is not always clarity, and that sometimes the most profound connection with the unseen comes when words are set aside. What is striking is how rituals, myths, and symbols endure even in the face of change. Empires rise and fall, technologies evolve, languages vanish, yet the instinct to ritualize remains. It suggests that the trial itself is not interested in erasing this impulse, but in shaping it, seeing how each culture transforms it, what new symbols are born, and what old ones survive. Humanity, in this sense, is not just being tested, but is itself the author of the evolving script. And so, when we look at the flicker of a candle, the telling of a myth, or the shared gesture of greeting, we see more than tradition. We glimpse the ongoing dialogue between the visible and the invisible, between the tested and the tester. Rituals are not relics of superstition. They are responses, creative and enduring, to the central question of the trial. How do we live with meaning in a world that offers no guarantees? If rituals are how communities try to touch the invisible, then power is how individuals and groups claim to interpret it. Again and again, across continents and centuries, leaders have declared themselves chosen, not merely to rule, but to embody the trial itself, to act as mediators between the unseen examiners and the ordinary lives of the tested. A king, an emperor, a high priest, these figures presented themselves as more than human administrators. They were thresholds where mortal life and cosmic mandate met. Consider the pharaohs of Egypt. Their crowns were not only ornaments but symbols of divine fusion. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt merging into a single authority, as if to say the ruler carried within himself the reconciliation of opposites. The pharaoh was Horus in life and Osiris in death, a god walking among mortals. His word was law because it was believed to echo the design of the cosmos itself. When he raised monuments of stone that pierced the sky, they were more than tombs. They were messages, affirmations, that the trial of humanity was watched over by a figure who stood at the hinge between heaven and earth. The same pattern emerges elsewhere, dressed in different mythologies. In Mesopotamia, kings spoke of receiving the scepter from the gods. their authority inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets, as if the heavens themselves had delivered contracts of power. In China, dynasties justified their rule through the mandate of heaven, a delicate balance in which prosperity signalled approval, but famine, flood, or rebellion could strip legitimacy away. Here the trial was not only individual but collective. The entire population bore witness to whether the ruler was passing or failing the cosmic test. Europe, too, cloaked power in sacred language. Medieval monarchs spoke of the divine right of kings, their coronations performed in cathedrals, oil poured on their brows as though they were prophets. In these rituals, the crown became not merely metal, but a seal, a binding between ruler and trial. Authority was never allowed to stand naked. It was wrapped in robes of meaning, justified by stories that placed rulers within a grander experiment. Yet the trial seemed to test rulers most severely. With power came the temptation to forget its purpose, to confuse mandate with privilege, duty with domination. History is littered with figures who claimed divine sanction only to fall in disgrace. Emperors toppled by revolt, kings executed by their subjects. Leaders whose monuments were defaced, their names erased as though the trial itself marked their failure. In such collapses, one sees the harsh impartiality of the test. No crown, no empire, no proclamation of chosenness could shield against the deeper evaluation at work. The myth of the just ruler, wise, benevolent, guided by the invisible order, stands beside the shadow of the tyrant, whose reign becomes a lesson in how power can corrupt the trial's intent. Was Caligula of Rome a god in flesh or a madman, destroying the very fabric he claimed to protect? Was Qin Shi Huang, unifier of China, a visionary who carved order out of chaos, or a despot whose quest for immortality revealed his terror of failing the test? The ambiguity remains, as though the trial itself thrives on forcing us to wrestle with these questions rather than resolve them. Power has also expressed itself not only in rulers, but in sacred hierarchies, the authority of priests, shamans, oracles. At Delphi, the Pythia sat upon her tripod, inhaling fumes and delivering words that shaped wars and treaties. Her power was not from armies, but from interpretation, from the ability to claim insight into the trial's hidden script. Similarly, in countless villages and tribes, shamans and elders held sway, not by force but by persuading others that they could read the signs, guide the community through the unseen maze. And always authority was clothed in symbols, a crown, a staff, a throne. These were not furniture, but artifacts of meaning, objects that condensed narratives of legitimacy. The throne room itself became a stage where power was performed, where subjects were reminded that their lives were part of a larger examination, administered through the figure seated above them. The ruler's gestures, raising a hand, pronouncing a decree, became ritual acts in their own right, extensions of the trial's gravity. What is striking is that even revolts against authority rarely abandon the language of mandate. Rebels claim to restore the true design, to unseat rulers who have failed the test. Revolutions frame themselves as purifications of the trial's order, not rejections of it. The French Revolution toppled monarchy, yet erected its own cults of reason and virtue. In the modern age, nations speak of democracy as the voice of the people, a mandate no less sacred than divine right, though clothed in secular terms. Authority, it seems, cannot escape the need to justify itself by invoking something beyond human whim, whether God, destiny, or the collective will. The trial does not allow neutrality. Leaders must step into its theatre, whether willingly or not, and history records their performance. Some leave legacies of inspiration, Ashoka renouncing conquest for compassion, Marcus Aurelius writing meditations on duty amid war, Elizabeth the Funneroed holding her kingdom together through words as much as armies. Others leave legacies of fear, their reigns remembered as warnings rather than models. Both outcomes serve the same purpose, to show that authority is itself one of the trial's most demanding examinations. And so, when we look at thrones, palaces, coronations, or revolutions, we see more than politics. We glimpse the deeper rhythm of the trial, testing not only the ruled, but the rulers, weighing how power is claimed, used, and justified. Kings and emperors may declare themselves chosen, but the true examiner is relentless, recording every act, every excess, every mercy. Power may seem absolute for a season, yet it always circles back to the same question. In the great trial of existence, what does it mean to rule, and what does it mean to fail? If power sought to claim authority over the trial, knowledge sought to understand its hidden rules. From the moment humans began to scratch symbols into clay or carve notches on bone, there was an instinct to capture patterns, to make sense of what seemed chaotic. Knowledge has always carried a double edge. It can illuminate, guiding us through the trial, but it can also unsettle, revealing how little we truly comprehend. Every scroll, every tablet, every equation is part of this restless pursuit of order amid mystery. The earliest philosophers were less like professors and more like wanderers peering into the fog. In Greece, Thales gazed at the sea and declared water the essence of all things. Heraclitus, watching fire and rivers, insisted that change itself was the foundation, that one could never step into the same river twice. Plato turned his eyes upward, sketching a world of eternal forms beyond our senses, while his student Aristotle bent his gaze to the ground, cataloguing plants, animals, and causes, seeking the trial's logic in the material itself. These were not idle speculations, but attempts to decode a universe that seemed structured, deliberate, as though designed to be deciphered. Elsewhere, other traditions mirrored the same search. In India, the Vedic texts unfolded cosmic cycles measured in kalpas, vast epochs of creation and dissolution, suggesting the trial was not linear but endlessly recursive. The Upanishads pressed deeper, asking whether the self and the cosmos were ultimately one, whether the individual taking the test was also the examiner. In China, Confucius framed life as a discipline of harmony and duty, while Laozi taught of the Tao, the subtle flow underlying all things, advising that wisdom lay not in conquering the trial, but in flowing with it. The impulse to record, to store, to pass down became itself a form of resistance against oblivion. In Mesopotamia, libraries of clay tablets held hymns, laws, astronomical observations. In Alexandria, scrolls gathered the accumulated thought of civilizations, a vast attempt to centralize the memory of the trial. In Mesoamerica, painted codices preserved rituals, genealogies, and celestial charts. Each archive was both fragile and monumental, an assertion that the test could be navigated if enough knowledge were preserved. Yet again and again, flames consumed them, armies torching libraries, priests erasing rival scripts, conquerors burning codices. The trial seemed to delight in testing not only what we knew, but whether we could hold on to it. When science emerged in its modern form, it carried the same spirit but sharpened it with new tools. Galileo tilted his telescope toward the heavens, revealing moons orbiting Jupiter, shattering the neat model of Earth as the fixed centre. Newton then distilled the cosmos into laws of motion and gravitation, as if he had uncovered the trial's equations themselves, showing how an apple's fall and a planet's orbit obeyed the same design. Later, Darwin looked at fossils and finches and dared to suggest that life itself was shaped by struggle and adaptation, a trial written into the very fabric of survival. The story of science is often told as triumph, yet beneath it lingers unease. Each discovery seems to answer one question, but open a dozen more. Quantum physics revealed particles that behave like waves, realities that shift when observed, as though the trial were laughing at our insistence on clarity. Cosmology speaks of dark matter and dark energy, invisible forces composing most of the universe, yet stubbornly refusing to be measured. Neuroscience maps neurons and chemicals, but cannot fully explain consciousness, the very awareness that takes the test. It is as though the closer we look, the more the trial reminds us that its structure is deeper, stranger, and less complete than we imagine. Philosophers too continued their restless dialogues. Descartes sought certainty in the cogito, the undeniable truth of thought itself. Kant drew boundaries, insisting that the mind could never access the thing in itself, only the appearances shaped by our faculties. Nietzsche threw thunderbolts at old certainties, declaring God dead and urging humanity to create its own meaning within the trial. In every era, thinkers wrestled with the same haunting tension. Is the universe decipherable, or is its opacity part of the design, ensuring that the trial never collapses into a solved puzzle? And knowledge has always carried risk. Prometheus in Greek myth stole fire, a metaphor for forbidden wisdom, and suffered eternal punishment. Adam and Eve in the Hebrew story ate from the tree of knowledge, and their eyes were opened to both wonder and suffering. In modern times, the splitting of the atom gave us energy and annihilation, medicine and weapons. To know is to wield, but wielding demands responsibility. Perhaps that is one of the trial's deepest questions. Will knowledge be used to elevate or to destroy, to heal or to dominate? Still, the pursuit never stops. From monks in candlelit monasteries copying manuscripts to researchers firing particles through giant accelerators, the same urgency drives us forward. Even in digital age with data flowing like rivers, we remain students, chasing the patterns, wondering whether the exam is open-ended or if there is indeed an answer sheet somewhere locked beyond reach. The act of seeking, of refusing to settle, may itself be part of the test, the examiner waiting to see if we can sustain curiosity without collapsing into despair. What becomes clear is that knowledge, in all its forms, is not simply about survival or utility. It is about orientation, a compass in the labyrinth. Every equation, every myth, every philosophy is a torch flickering in the dark, lighting the next step, though never the entire path. The trial is vast, but with each question asked, with each attempt to understand, humanity leaves marks, breadcrumbs for the generations who follow. Whether those marks lead to truth or only deeper mystery may not matter. What matters is that we continue the search. If knowledge seeks to decode the trial's hidden rules, then art is humanity's attempt to reshape them, to answer not with equations but with visions. From the first handprint pressed in ochre on a cave wall, humans have declared, "We were here, and we have seen something worth remembering." These marks were not idle decorations, but statements of presence, of wonder, of fear. In the dark chambers of Lascaux or Chauvet, flickering torchlight brought painted animals to life, suggesting that imagination itself was a tool of survival. The trial may have demanded adaptation and endurance, but creativity offered a way to transcend the immediate, to hold on to a sense of meaning. Music, too, entered early. Flutes carved from bird bones over 30,000 years ago released tones that echoed across valleys. They were more than sound. They were continuity, a way to weave rhythm into existence, to align the body with cycles larger than itself. In every culture, songs carried memory where writing did not yet exist. Chants preserved genealogies, melodies held myths, drums marked time for rituals. The trial, it seemed, could be endured if given rhythm, if hardship could be transformed into harmony. As civilizations grew, art expanded into forms both monumental and intimate. Pyramids, ziggurats, and temples rose as stone testaments to the invisible. Their carvings were more than ornament. They were encoded cosmologies, visual philosophies, attempts to make the trial structure visible in stone. At the same time, humble clay figures or woven textiles carried personal hopes, fertility prayers, charms for protection. The trial was both vast and personal, and creativity was the bridge between the two. The Greeks sculpted gods in marble, their forms idealized yet human, as though suggesting that the divine examiner of the trial was not so far from the human test-taker. The Mayans filled codices with painted glyphs, blending astronomy, history, and vision into one seamless art. The Chinese painted scrolls where mountains rose like breathing beings, human figures small, fragile, but part of the flow. Each culture revealed not only what it valued, but how it interpreted the trial, some as struggle, others as harmony, some as divine mandate, others as an endless cycle. But art was not always reverent, it also questioned. In tragedies, Greek playwrights like Sophocles explored the limits of human choice, suggesting that fate might be rigged, that the trial's examiner was cruel or indifferent. In satire, Roman poets mocked authority, hinting that the entire structure of power and ritual was absurd. Later, during the Renaissance, painters like Hieronymus Bosch filled canvases with bizarre creatures and chaotic scenes, as if to suggest that the trial was a surreal riddle, overflowing with symbols that defied any single interpretation. The imagination has often gone where reason cannot tread. Mythologies created entire worlds to explain storms, stars, love, and death. Visionaries like William Blake painted angels and cosmic battles as if they were unfolding just beyond the visible. Poets spoke in metaphors because the trial could not be reduced to straightforward instructions. The surrealists of the 20th century plunged into dream and subconscious, insisting that imagination was not escapism but revelation, showing aspects of the trial hidden beneath the conscious mind. Art has also served as rebellion against the trial's harshness. Enslaved peoples sang spirituals that carried coded messages of escape and layered them with hope. Graffiti has appeared on walls of ancient Rome and modern cities alike, a defiant act of presence, saying, "Even if the trial is cruel, I will leave my mark." During wars, paintings, poems, and films emerged not to glorify destruction, but to remind that beauty persists even in rubble. Creativity in these moments was survival not of the body but of the soul. One striking element of art is its ability to compress time. A painting or a story carries voices across centuries, whispering to strangers who will never meet the creator. In this sense, creativity defeats one of the trial's greatest challenges, impermanence. When we read Homer's Odyssey or gaze at cave paintings older than recorded history, we feel a continuity that defies the erosion of years. Art allows communication not only across distance, but across time. binding test takers of different eras into a single, ongoing conversation. The imagination also dares to imagine beyond the trial itself. Religious art has painted heavens and hells, offering visions of what lies beyond the exam room. Science fiction imagines alternate futures where humanity evolves, colonizes stars, or confronts artificial minds. Fantasy creates entire worlds with their own rules, testing not only what reality is but what it could be. These acts are not diversions, they are rehearsals, ways of preparing for possibilities yet to come. If the trial structure is unknown, imagination lets us practice for every outcome. Yet, like knowledge, creativity is double-edged. It can inspire liberation or reinforce control. Propaganda posters and monumental statues have turned imagination into a tool of domination, shaping narratives to keep populations obedient. Films and songs can carry both truth and manipulation. The trial asks not only whether we can create, but also whether we can discern what creation serves, the illumination of mystery or the tightening of chains. What becomes undeniable is that creativity is not secondary to survival, it is woven into it. Without imagination, survival would be mechanical, stripped of meaning. But with imagination, even pain can be framed, transformed, sung. In that transformation lies resilience. If the trial is indeed a deliberate design, then perhaps its examiner waits not for us to solve every puzzle, but to see whether we can create in the face of uncertainty, whether we can turn silence into music, blank stone into story, fleeting moments into symbols that endure. As long as humans paint, sing, write, dance and dream, the trial remains more than an ordeal. It becomes a stage, a canvas, a story still being told. And perhaps that is the hidden truth, that the trial's meaning is not given but made, crafted by the ones who dare to imagine. If knowledge is a lantern and art a mirror, then faith is the fire that has burned the longest in the human night. From the earliest whispers around campfires to the towering spires of cathedrals, people have turned to the unseen, weaving myths and prayers not only as explanations but as anchors. The trial, whatever it may be, has always felt too vast to endure without a story that promises meaning. Faith, in its countless forms, has offered that story. Myth is where faith first takes root. It begins with tales of creation, worlds born from chaos, oceans parted by gods, humanity moulded from clay or blood. In Mesopotamia, the Enuma Elish spoke of primordial waters and the struggle between Tiamat and Marduk, a cosmic battle that framed existence as the outcome of divine contest. In Egypt, Ra sailed across the heavens each day, only to descend into the underworld each night and battle the serpent Apophis, ensuring that dawn would come again. These myths were not idle fictions. They were survival tools, explanations for cycles of nature, reminders that the trial had a rhythm and that behind its terrors was intention. As myths deepened, rituals arose. Fire was not merely warmth but an offering. Bread was not merely food but communion. Water was not merely thirst's relief but cleansing of unseen burdens. Through ritual, the invisible became touchable. A hunter painting antelopes on a cave wall might have believed the act itself summoned success. A farmer sacrificing grain to the soil might have believed it was dialogue with spirits of fertility. Each act was an attempt to bend the rules of the trial, or at least to ask for mercy. Faith, however, is not uniform. It stretches across extremes, from the comfort of gentle gods to the terror of wrathful ones. Some traditions offer reassurance that the trial ends with reunion, peace, or transcendence. Others warn that judgment awaits, that the trial is scored with precision and failure leads to torment. The Greeks imagined Hades, where shades drifted in shadows, some punished, some rewarded. Norse myth envisioned Valhalla, a hall of warriors, where those who died bravely continued the trial in preparation for Ragnarok, the end of all things. In these variations, one thread remains. The trial never truly ends with death. Something continues beyond. With the rise of organised religions, faith took on vast architectures, literal and symbolic. Temples, mosques, churches, and stupas became earthly footholds of the unseen. Their walls carried stories in carvings and stained glass. Their halls amplified chants so that the human voice seemed larger than itself. Pilgrimages across deserts, mountains, and oceans became journeys within journeys, reenacting the trial in miniature. Believers carried not only offerings but questions. Who set this exam? Why suffering? Why love? And above all, is there someone listening? For many, faith was liberation. It gave dignity to suffering, framing it as part of a larger arc. A slave hearing the Exodus story could believe that bondage was not permanent, that deliverance lay ahead. A monk in silence could trust that every denied comfort was a step toward higher truth. Faith gave meaning to trials within the trial, assuring that endurance was not wasted but recorded. Yet faith also clashed with knowledge. When Galileo pointed his telescope and saw moons orbiting Jupiter, he threatened the neat order of Scripture. When Darwin proposed that humanity was not a sudden creation, but a long unfolding, it challenged centuries of belief. At such moments, faith defended itself fiercely, sometimes silencing voices, sometimes burning them. But even in conflict, dialogue remained, for faith and knowledge chased the same horizon. Why are we here, and what does it mean? Art, too, has often fused with faith. Cathedrals are symphonies in stone. Islamic calligraphy is poetry turned into architecture. Buddhist mandalas are visual prayers. Navajo sand paintings are fleeting cosmic diagrams. The sacred and the creative cannot be neatly separated. For many, art is itself an act of faith, while faith is itself a creative imagination. Michelangelo painting the Sistine ceiling, Rumi composing verses of divine love, or shamans dancing in trance. Each embodies a belief that unseen realities are not only real but reachable. Still, faith has shadows. It has justified wars, inquisitions, persecutions. The Crusades painted the trial as a battlefield between chosen and damned. Witch hunts turned fear into fire. Colonial empires carried both sword and scripture, convincing themselves they were bringing light while spreading domination. In these cases, faith became less about mystery and more about control, less about awe and more about fear. The trial, reframed through such systems, became not universal, but tribal, dividing humanity into insiders and outsiders. And yet, even in its most rigid forms, faith holds a paradoxical flexibility. Saints and mystics in every tradition have pushed against orthodoxy, insisting that the examiner of the trial is not bound by human rules. The Sufi poet whispered that God was not in doctrine, but in the beating of the heart. Zen masters spoke of enlightenment in the sound of a pebble against bamboo. Christian mystics describe divine union as fire overwhelming the soul. These voices remind us that while institutions build walls, faith at its core is not about control, but encounter. Across cultures, one question recurs: is the trial itself a sacred act? Some say yes, that suffering purifies, that challenges shape the soul, that each obstacle is divinely crafted. Others say no, that the trial is illusion, that reality itself is Maya, a veil, and true awakening is to step outside the exam altogether. Hindu sages spoke of liberation from samsara, the endless cycle. Buddhists sought nirvana, the extinguishing of grasping. Gnostics whispered that the world was a flawed copy, a trap set by lesser powers. These views differ, yet they converge on one daring suggestion. The trial may not be about passing at all, but about realizing one was free all along. Today, faith persists, not only in temples but in living rooms, online forums, whispered prayers before sleep, silent gratitude in hospitals, chants in stadiums, vigils after tragedy. Even those who declare no religion often hold some form of faith in humanity, in progress, in love, in the simple persistence of hope. It may not be carved into stone, but it burns just as deeply. If the trial is real, then perhaps faith is the most enduring response of all. Not because it guarantees the right answers, but because it allows people to walk into uncertainty with courage. Faith says, you may not know the examiner, you may not know the questions, but you're not alone. Whether whispered in Latin, Arabic, Sanskrit, Hebrew, or silence, the same plea echoes. Let there be meaning. Let there be mercy. Let there be more than what we see. At the edge of every question lies silence, and in that silence humanity has always stood, sometimes trembling, sometimes curious, sometimes bold enough to speak back. If the journey through knowledge, art and faith has shown anything, it is that the trial, whatever its nature, has been less about solutions and more about responses. Knowledge builds tools, art builds mirrors, faith builds stories. Together, they form a triad that has allowed people not only to endure the trial, but to imagine it as something more than punishment or chance. They have shaped survival into meaning. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the human story is not the accumulation of answers, but the persistence of wonder. A child staring at stars today shares the same awe as a Sumerian priest or a medieval scholar. That continuity hints at the trial may not be graded by what one knows, but by whether one can keep asking. If there is an examiner, perhaps the first question is not, what do you believe, but have you looked? For looking at the heavens, at the ruins, at each other, is itself an act of defiance against despair. Knowledge, as we traced, has expanded the map. It showed us that stars are suns, that atoms are not indivisible, that time bends with gravity, that DNA threads through every living thing. Each revelation has made the world stranger, not smaller. Instead of dissolving mystery, science has revealed layers of it, each deeper than the last. In this sense, knowledge is not the opposite of faith, but another expression of the same longing to know what lies behind the veil. Art, meanwhile, has preserved the echoes of the trial. Paintings, poems, symphonies, dances, all carry the mark of their era's fears and hopes. They remind us that the trial is not endured alone, but shared across generations. When we stand before the cave paintings of Lascaux, or listen to a requiem by Mozart, or read a line from a poet centuries gone, we feel that strange collapse of time. Others before us face the same abyss, and they too left a signal, saying, I was here, I felt this, you are not the first. Art binds the scattered examinees into a chorus. Faith remains the heartbeat beneath both knowledge and art. Even stripped of institutions, even questioned or reshaped, it endures as trust. Trust that the trial is not meaningless, that there is value in the journey even when the ending is uncertain. Faith teaches resilience, that to plant a tree knowing one will never sit in its shade is still worthwhile, that to forgive is greater than to retaliate, that to hope is not weakness, but strength. But what if all of these, knowledge, art, faith, are not separate strategies, but intertwined strands of the same thread. What if they are the trial's true purpose, the examiner's silent expectation? Not that humanity chooses one path, but that it learns to weave them together. Imagine a civilization that studies the stars with rigour, honours them with song, and approaches them with reverence. That civilization might not only survive but flourish, seeing itself as part of a cosmos that is both knowable and sacred. Still, the question lingers. To what end? If this is a test, what is being tested? Some would say morality, that the examiner is measuring kindness against cruelty, justice against corruption. Others argue it is creativity, that the test is whether we can imagine futures better than the past. Others still suggest it is endurance, that the universe asks only if we can persist long enough to matter. And yet perhaps the test is subtler, whether we can recognize ourselves as the examiner. For when we peer into the future, into the possibility of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, interstellar travel, we become the ones setting trials for others. Our machines will inherit our questions. Our descendants will judge our choices. In that sense, humanity is not only examined but examining, not only tested but testing. The trial reflects back. History offers a warning. Civilizations that forgot humility often fell, not by cosmic decree but by their own blindness. When power replaced wisdom, when conquest silenced art, when dogma suffocated faith, collapse followed. If the trial has lessons, one of them may be this: to balance curiosity with care, ambition with humility, certainty with doubt. The examiner, if one exists, may not demand perfection, but balance. As we stand now, in an age where telescopes gaze at galaxies billions of light years away, and microscopes peer into particles smaller than imagination, where digital archives preserve voices long gone, and billions of people are connected across oceans instantly, the trial feels more vast than ever. We may never know if it was designed, but we know this: it has called forth astonishing responses. From clay tablets to quantum equations, from hymns to holograms, from whispered prayers to symphonies, humanity has filled the trial with its own answers, however incomplete. And perhaps that is the point. The trial may not be about passing or failing, but about creating. Each generation adds to the archive, layering knowledge upon myth, art upon ritual, faith upon doubt. The examiner, if there is one, might be less a judge and more a witness, watching to see not whether we solve the riddle, but whether we sing while solving it. So we return to where we began, with a strange hypothesis. What if Earth is a test? The answer, after all our wandering, may be less important than the journey it has inspired. For in seeking to understand, we have built civilizations. In fearing and hoping, we have composed prayers and paintings. In questioning, we've become more than we were. The trial, then, may not measure what we achieve, but who we become along the way. And here we are, together in this moment. You listening, I speaking, across unseen wires and airwaves, both participants in the same great puzzle. Perhaps that is all the confirmation we need, that the trial is real, because we are still here, still asking, still reaching. Welcome once again to Arcane Skies. If this journey has stirred something in you, share it. A like, a subscription, a comment about where and when you're hearing these words. Not because such gestures change the trial, but because they remind us that we are not taking it alone. In the end, the greatest discovery may not be the examiner, but each other.